Welcome to this edition on Chapter 9, Advanced Compositing. We're going to go ahead and make this very ghouly, scary Curse of the Frankenstein poster from like a movie. And it's really the power of Photoshop. I find what you can do in Photoshop is compositing, bringing many different photos together, finding elements, and put them together to a pretty interesting, out-of-this-world type of experience that can't be done really any other way. So let's begin. The book starts by going into our Monster Makeup series, selecting one of the layers. Here I have the bolts.psd, and then shift-clicking the last element so they are all selected in Bridge. Once I've got multiple elements, I'm going to go ahead and go to Tools, Photoshop, Load into Photoshop Layers. I'm going to click that. And this process now will take a while as it's going to composite some of the different elements that it's putting together. So we'll do this process. And when I would say was looking at Unsplash, Pexels, other sites are a great way to get ideas, pieces of a puzzle. When you start to do your own compositing, there are many different resources out there to bring in different pieces. There's really no excuse for shooting your own work as well, whether even that's with a phone or with a nice camera. I've done quite a bit of compositing over the years, and this is a shot I did actually on the campus of Maranatha Baptist University. Everything was shot on the campus, minus my rain layer. My rain layer was shot in the garage against a black background, and then I was able to composite that in. I don't want to make a mess in an indoor building in the studio. So this is what I did. I'm going to go to the breakdown between turning everything off, disabling my mask and my layers, so you can see everything, and turning off some of these different options. And so compositing is really breaking things down to its base level. And we're going to go ahead and turn this mask off and disable this mask, and shooting everything in its element, and turning off this mask. Let's turn that back on. And breaking down the elements that we have here. So the breakdown between the different layers, even different Photoshop, one for the knife where the reflection was on the knife, some protection there so the baby didn't roll off, changing it for the glaring of the knife, and there was some distance there, nobody was hurt in the process of filming of this story. But the idea comes from Genesis 22. And the idea where Abraham is told by God to go ahead and sacrifice your only son. And he does so, and then God stops him right at the end. The idea is, would I sacrifice my only son? I have 4 kids. Would I sacrifice them? I wouldn't sacrifice one of them to save anybody. Quite a imagination, or quite a story of faith. And I found it very powerful. Something I did in my grad work called Dust to Life, the Visual Gospel. You can go ahead and take a look at it. I have other videos on Dust to Life, the Visual Gospel, if you're interested. But it is compositing. Go ahead and turn this piece on, piece by piece, and seeing the different breakdown of what you can do. And this took many, many hours. I would say this one probably took me about, 15, 20 hours. This doesn't just happen. It's shooting all the different pieces. I didn't use anything from stock images, but putting it all together and really having it come down, faking the light. The light had a bright spot, sure, but then I go ahead and exaggerate it to emphasize that more and to bring out the sometimes called God rays is all part of what compositing does as it brings out your piece. And so good compositing takes work, it takes creativity, it takes imagination. And let's go ahead and break down how the book does it here with Chapter 9. So we've go ahead and loaded all these elements. Then we're going to go ahead and save this as a working file. So we're going to go to File, Save As. We're going to go to name it as 09working.psd. And now I'm saved and ready to go. First step the book has us do is arranging the different layers. Now your image file contains 8 different layers listed now in alphabetical order. That's probably not the order that we want them, but they are listed at least alphabetically. And we're going to rearrange them to get in the position that we want to make our monster, Frankenstein. We're going to go ahead and hit Control-0 to fit the document to my screen size so I can see all the layout of the canvas. In the Layers panel, we're going to go ahead and find the monster hair file, which is technically at the bottom. And we're going to move it all the way to the top. Next, we're going to bring the Franken layer to the bottom of the stack. This, I believe, is the author of the book. Franken layer to the bottom. And using the Move tool, which I can get in the toolbar, I can temporarily hold Control to get it. And we're going to go ahead and drag the Franken layer, the image of the person, to the bottom of the canvas. About there. In the Layers panel, we're going to go ahead and select every layer by clicking the green shirt layer here, and then all the way up to the monster hair layer. We don't want the Franken layer.psd selected. And then we're going to go up to Edit, and down to Free Transform. Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac is the shortcut. Now each one of these layers is now movable, editable by size. And we're going to drag down the corner of the selection to resize all the selected layers to 50% of their original size. Now I can click and I can drag it. Now in the upper left in the Options panel, I can see that setting. I can click and drag and make it 50%. Or I can technically go ahead and just type in 50%. And it will resize them. It is locked here, which is important. If it was not locked and I made it 50% and the other one it was 100%, it's going to skew it in a very odd manner. We want to go ahead and make sure they are locked and make it at 50% scale. Now with this active, we're going to go ahead and position it over his face about there. And then we're going to go ahead and commit that assignment with Enter or hit the checkbox at the top to make that change. Now we're going to zoom in a little bit to see the head a little bit more clearly. Honestly, I think this guy definitely needs to have his head examined very closely. Now we're going to go ahead and hide all the layers but the green skin layer. Now if I Alt-click on the eye, the Alt-click allows me to see the green screen layer all by himself. Then we'll go ahead and turn the Franken layer on. But I do want to make sure I have just the green screen texture layer moved. Use the Move tool. I can use it from the toolbar. Or remember, I can Shift and click with the arrow keys or Control Shift will move my section over. If I don't hold Shift, it's 1 pixel at a time. If I hold Shift, it's 10 pixels at a time. We want to be able to center it over his face. About like that. Then we're going to go ahead to Edit, Free Transform, or Control T or Command T. Now we're going to adjust the texture of his face using the eyes and the mouth as a guide. We're going to go ahead and drag the handles to adjust the width and the height. If we want to make it so it squishes it, we can hold Shift and then skew it bigger or smaller, holding Shift. We're going to go ahead and hit Enter or commit the changes. Save our file. Control S or Command S on a Mac. Now we're going to use Smart Layers. Now, Smart Layers are super powerful. They're a big deal what Photoshop can do. They're unlike regular filters. When we make a permanent change, with a smart object, we can go ahead and make a change and then make those changes later into the future, even after the Photoshop file is saved days down the road, months down the road, millennium down the road. We could open up Photoshop and still make the edits because it's a smart object. They're what we call non-destructive filters. First, we need to take the green screen texture then to a smart object. We do that by right-clicking on the layer, going up to the contextual menu to convert to smart object. Convert to smart object, we can tell because it has the smart object logo now in the corner of the icon. Then we're going to go up to Liquify under Filter, down to Liquify. Now we've already done a little bit of Liquify tool in Lesson Chapter 5. We can go ahead and take a look at that if you want through the link there. Otherwise, you can continue learning the more advanced options here with Liquify tool. We want to scroll down to our Liquify tool, down to the Show Backdrop. We show Backdrop. That will show the layer that's on, if it's on, which we should have it on, the Franken.psd layer. Now that has been turned on. And I'm going to go ahead and say make it 75%. So we can see it a little crisper, a little clearer there. Now we're going to go and use the Zoom tool. We can click and drag, which is fine. We can do Control plus, zoom in, see it a little bit tighter on the screen. And then we're going to use the Forward Warp tool, the very top in the tool panel here. Forward Warp tool. And in the brush settings, brush tool settings on the right, we're going to go ahead and make it 150 with the pressure sensitivity of 75. Now the forward warp tool will pull the Mountainster's makeup on his right eyebrow down to close the eye opening. So we grab the top of the brow and then move it down. And then from the bottom of the eye and pull it up. Maybe do it from a couple of, oops, that's a little bit too much, a little too sensitive. Squish that eye, top and bottom a little bit. We're going to do the same thing for the other eye, the left eye, his left eye. Push it down, top up a little bit, squishing that eye shut. Close those gaps a little bit. Creating an even scarier face, and we're going to hit OK. Now those changes have squished his eyes a little bit more. You can see that in the history panel before and after. He's got a more squinty look. Scary, definitely, for sure. Now let's go ahead and position the other layers. We're going to go ahead and turn on the green noise stitches layer. And we'll go ahead and select it so it's activated, otherwise I'll be moving the textured layer. Now I can click and drag it with my move tool, which is selected. First we'll go to free transform, Control T or edit free transform. And position the layer over the nose, resizing as necessary. You want to see his nose, so about like that. And then accept the changes, commit with enter or return. Now we're going to go and do the rest of the layers. I'm going to go into the make neck green stitches, turn the eye on, select the layer. I'm going to put this on his neck area. I use the spacebar tool to navigate in the piece. The spacebar tool is an excellent way to move your document instead of zooming or using the sidebar over top and bottom. Spacebar allows you to move in any direction, which is a time saver and super helpful. Just temporarily hold space, and regardless of what tool you have, unless you're using the text tool, you have the ability to navigate your piece around. Let's use the neck tool. We're going to use the free transform, Control T or Command T on a Mac, or to edit and free transform. And we're going to reposition it a little more around his neck. Maybe give it a little rotation on the side. Something like that. And then accept it with enter or return. Do the same thing with the green ear staples piece. I'm going to move the staple over his right ear. And we can go ahead and hit free transform, Control T, or edit transform to resize it a little bit, skew it down, fit over the right ear setting, somewhere around here. And then enter to accept that change. We'll do the same thing with the enhanced green forested piece. We'll do the same thing with the enhanced green forehead piece. Go ahead and select it, move it near his forehead. Go ahead and hit Control T or Command T on a Mac to transform it a little bit. To make it fit his forehead about there, right over the eyes. About there. You can make him look like a big cone head or however you want to position that. Holding Shift, remember I can skew it. If I don't hold Shift, it will be proportionate. About like that. Maybe move it down a couple with my arrow keys. And that looks pretty good. And then the last layer, the bolts.pse, select it and turn it on. Go ahead and free transform, Control T or Command T on a Mac. Or go up to edit and free transform. And we want to go ahead and position this snugly around his neck. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink it down. Oh, a little bit too small. Now, I will say this is not a smart object, so if I go ahead and accept these changes at the moment, it will permanently damage the layer. So if I make it too small, then go ahead and transform it and make it larger, I will pixelate the file. So I do want to make sure I get it the right size or a little too big to start. I'd rather err in bigness than make it smaller and then pixelate it later. About like that. Accept my changes. I can use the arrow keys to move it up a little bit if I want. And the last layer, we're going to go ahead and the monster layer, turn that on. Free transform that to give them a little bit of haircut. Tie it all together. This is a crucial piece to make sure his, overlapping parts look blended right. Something like that. That looks pretty good. Editing a smart filter. Now, I can go ahead and find that smart filter, which I did to my green screen texture. And now it says smart filter, it says Liquify, that's the tool that I've added. Because I've had a smart object, I can actually see this effect. I can double click Liquify. It will pop back up in Liquify tool. This time it shows up, all my background is visible because I have my show backup option on. Sometimes it's easy to turn that off, to not be distracted by other elements. In this instance, we want to tie them all together, so I definitely recommend having it on. I'll go ahead and zoom in a bit so I can see his eyes, Control plus, or Command plus on a Mac, something like that. We're going to use the Pucker tool next. The Pucker tool is right up here. The Pucker tool, I'm going to click on the corner of each eye. Then kind of close in his eyes a little bit, kind of shrink them. Kind of creepy looking actually. Really close them up a little bit. I use Pucker tool for a lot to make someone look a little bit more slender. If you want to take off a few pounds, the Pucker tool could be good for that. I'll make another video on how to do that at another time. And we can experiment with the bloat. If we make it too full, we can go over to the bloat tool, and we can do the opposite. It'll unpucker it. It'll blow it back up a little bit. The brush size, the bigger the brush, will make it a more obvious effect. The smaller the brush, will be a less obvious bloat or pucker. Make it the way you like it. Now you can always use Control-Z to undo something. When you're happy with the way it looks, go ahead and hit OK to accept his changes. And now we've made it even creepier. Now we're going to go ahead and do some painting of the layer. There's many ways to paint objects and layers in Photoshop. One of the simplest ways is to use the color blending mode and the brush tool. We're going to go ahead and select the Franken layer. And we're going to create a new layer, which will go right above the Franken layer. Now it's going to be blank. We see that by the transparencies. And it's named Layer 1. With Layer 1 selected, we're going to go ahead and choose Color from the color blending mode. Right there. And the color blending mode combines the luminance, the brightness of the base color already on the layer, with the hue and the saturation of the color you're applying. So it's a good blending mode to use when you're color monochroming images or tinting different colored images. In the Tools panel, we're going to go and find the Brush tool. And in the Options bar, we're going to go ahead and make it 60 pixels with a hardness of 0, so it's soft and feathered, more gradual effect. Now we're going to hold down Alt or Option if you're on a Mac to temporarily switch to the eyedropper tool and sample a green color, somewhere on the green skin tone, kind of that olive green. We're going to go ahead and Control-click on the thumbnail for the Franken layer. By doing that, brings up the selection, the little marching ants, onto our layer. And we do want to make sure that Layer 1 is still active, not the Franken layer, but Layer 1 is selected, which it is here. Then we're going to use our Brush tool, which we've got selected. And we're going to paint over the arms and the hands, giving him that greenish color that we selected from his forehead. We want to paint over his arms and his hands, really not getting onto his shirt. We don't want that to blend right. Get over there, his shirt will get a little weird color. Go ahead and erase that. But if you're careful not to color on his shirt, go back to my brush. You can brush over his watch. But anywhere where there's skin, we want his hands to look as creepy as his face. Don't tell him, but that does sound kind of a little scary. That was an insult. I'm sorry. I apologize. Didn't mean to offend anybody. Go ahead and erase a little bit here of the green that I spilled over. I just click E for the eraser tool. I'm going to go ahead and erase the part that I don't want. Create a little bit of touch up there. Go ahead and save the file. Next, I'm going to go ahead and deselect. Now I can do that through selecting and Control D or Command D on a Mac and deselect. So nothing is selected now on the layer. Now everything can be edited on the layer 1 layer. Now we're going to add a background. Now we've got a very good looking monster. Now we need to create the environment for the background. Now we're going to go ahead and make all these layers here merge together. Now the book recommends merging them. What I'm going to go ahead and have to do is go ahead and duplicate them so they're in their own setup. Once they're duplicated, I'm going to go ahead and have the duplicate ones do a merge or flatten these layers. So now I have these here. What I'm going to go ahead and do is take all these other layers and I'm going to go ahead and group them together. I can do that by hitting the little folder button here or Control G. This is all my backup option. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off, so I'm not going to see it still. But I have all these layers here as editable, non-destructive layers. I still have them there if I want to have them. Now I have the monster hair layer. This is all the edit. All these are now one layer instead of multiple layers working together. I'm going to go ahead and change this to just straight up monster. It may say layer 1 or some other layer depending on which layers you selected when you did your selection and merge. Now I'm going to go back to Bridge. We'll go back to our Lesson 9 folder. I'm going to go ahead and find our backdrop, the backdrop.psd. We'll go ahead and open it. We're going to go to Window, Arrange to Up, Vertical. So I can see each one on its own screen. Go ahead and zoom out on this one a little bit. Fit to screen. And fit to screen. Control 0 or Command 0 to Mac is a good way to fit to screen. Now I'm going to use the Move tool. I'm going to actually go ahead and take it from this working.psd. I'm going to move my monster layer over into the Franken layer. You can see the plus option. And let it go. And now I still have it on the working file, but now I have my backdrop layer here. Now we'll go ahead and close this file. Yes, I'll save this file. I'm going to go ahead and name this one. Now the book has us go ahead and save this file as not a working file or the backdrop.psd. We'll call it a movie-poster.psd. We'll go ahead and hit save. So it has my monster file loaded in. Now I can always go to my history panel and I can always redo going back and forth, choosing different layers, different options if I so choose. But now that I've had all the changes and I put into a different file, all those changes will not actually show up in the history panel because this is a new file that I drug all my layer edits of the Frankenstein to. Now we're going to go ahead and apply some filters and some effects. Go over to File, we'll go over to Open. We'll find the T1 file, T1 PSD, and we're going to open that up. Here's the picture of a rest in peace tombstone. Pretty plain at this point, but we're going to add some texture and some color to it to make it a little more advanced. In the Tools panel, we're going to go ahead and make sure that our default colors here, by clicking D, that gives you the default colors. We want to go ahead and make sure the foreground color, the front color here, not the background color. The foreground color is black, which it is. By clicking D, it does give me those defaults instead of the green, olive green that I had from Frankenstein. Now that it's black, I'm going to go up to Filter, Render, over to Difference Clouds. And that creates this interesting automatic cloud texture over my tombstone, much different than what I had. Adds a little bit of drama. Then we're going to go up to Filter, Blur Gallery, Iris Blur. I can go ahead and click and drag this filter around a little bit to change where the blur is going to affect. So it's going to be a little hazy on part of the tombstone. That is going to blur the bottom portion. About like that. And then we're going to go ahead and hit OK at the top in the options bar. Next, we're going to use adjustment layers. We go to the adjustments panel. Go to the brightness contrast. Looks like the sun with a bright and dark portion of the sun. And we're going to go to the properties panel and we're going to give it a 70 for the brightness. This brightens it up quite a bit. Next, we're going to go into our adjustments. Go to our color mixer tool. And the output channel is a big deal here. We're not going to do the red. I did that the first time, but this doesn't look right. We want to change it from the red to the green channel. So I have red, green, blue, the three colors of a photograph. Go to the green channel, which will automatically put my red at 0. I'm going to go to my green. I'm going to go ahead and type 37. Then I'm going to take the blue channel and give it 108. That gives it kind of a green, eerie, creepy feel. Another adjustment, I'm going to go to the adjustment layer. And I'm going to go to the exposure tab. Looks like the little plus and minus option. I click the exposure tab, and I'm going to bump it up by a 0.90. Brightens up the entire exposure just a little bit. For some reason you don't think it looks quite right, you can always go to your history panel and we can adjust the history by going back to a different layer if we so choose. Notice when I click the blur gallery in the history panel, all my other settings, all my adjustment layers that I just did are gone. From when I go back, I can click and have them all back if I want to, but go to the blur gallery and they're all gone to actually match more of what's going to be fitting in this layer right here. Go ahead and click the Modify Channel Mixer layer. That makes the adjustment to give it back to green, but it doesn't use the exposure, which I did after the fact. Go back to the difference. You can see the difference before we did the blurring to it. Now, everything before we did the blur gallery and after is not happening, is not on the layers panel as well. Now we're going to go to Filter, and then to Noise. From Noise to Add Noise. The book instructs putting the amount to 3%, selecting Gaussian, and then monochromatic. We zoom in a bit. So let's just see the noise. It's subtle, but it's there. Kind of helps give it a, like it's going to belong with another picture that has a little bit of noise, some artifacts to it. I hit OK. Notice all the other effects after we add the noise are no longer an option. So once you make a new change of the portion you are in the history panel, everything else after it is no longer an option. That's an important aspect when we get into doing complex filters and edits. We're going to Arrange, Tile All Vertically. And with the Move tool, we're going to go ahead and drag our tombstone into the movie poster file. And let it go. It'll say if you want to adjust this to different color settings, you can go ahead and hit OK. That's totally fine. I have my tombstone here. The book instructs putting it in the bottom left corner. Somewhere like that. Go ahead and save your file. Control S or Command S on a Mac. Or you can go up to File and Save. Then we'll go ahead and close the T1 file. Now it's important to remember with all the history panel changes, how you make the new effect, the new layer does change your history panel. You can get up to 50 different states. 50 of your last changes are available in the history panel. After that, the 51st setting, Photoshop will forget what the 50th setting was. You can also click, if you've went done to like say 51 or 52 adjustments, click the background.psd and it will show you what it was when you first opened the file. So technically it saves the very first step, regardless. Now, if you want to edit the history panel options, you go to Edit, Preferences, Performance. This is on Windows. On a Mac, it'll say you go to the Edit Photoshop Preferences feature. And you can choose a different histogram setup in here to have more or less settings. The more settings you have, it'll take up a little more RAM, a little more of your temporary memory. and it could slow your computer down if it's a little bit slower. And you'd hit OK. Now let's improve a lower resolution image. At times, you need to take an image where the only version available is a low pixel dimensions, and you got to stretch it out, make it a little bit larger. We call this resampling an image. It's increasing its pixel dimensions by creating new pixels based on the existing ones. It does a little bit of guessing and algorithm to figure this out. We're going to go to File, Open. We're going to open the Faces JPEG. Now this is a small file. It's great for some internet or emailing things or maybe small social media post. But it's pretty small. This is 100% size. If I go to Image Size, I can see that my picture is only 216 pixels by 288 pixels. And a lot of the images you find on the web aren't very large. They just aren't. And that's for a reason, to keep things small and uploading fast. We're going to change it from inches to percentage. And we're going to go ahead and type in 300%. And we're going to go ahead and type in... So here's the image. I'm going to go ahead and zoom into 300%. This is what it views at 300%. You can start to see pixelization. It doesn't look all that good in here. It's starting to blow up a little bit. If we zoom up even more, you can really start to see the quality just is not good. So if I go back to image size, I'm going to go ahead and change to percentage. I'm going to go ahead and change it to 400%, making sure that it is skewed correctly with the locking the height and the width together. I'm going to go ahead and make sure the resample is on, which it should be. Then I'm going to change it from a resample automatic. I'm going to go to bicubic smoother enlargement. See, that kind of smooths it. It doesn't look quite as sharp and crisp now, but it does help avoid some of the pixelization and some of the noise factor. Then we're going to change it, instead of the bicubic smoother, we're going to go ahead and change it to the preserve details. And this does help keep some of the crispness, the sharpness around there. But there's some noise and some artifacts that are put together. So I'm going to go ahead and change it through the reduced noise to 50% to kind of smooth out some of those little wrinkles in there, but to maintain some of the crispness and the sharpness around the edges. So it's going to give some type of a sampleization enlargement, but it's doing a better job than if it just did a free transform and enlarged it on its own. I hit OK. Now this is it at 400%. I'm going to go ahead and fit to screen. Now that's creepy. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this into a feathered selection. So we're going to go ahead and hit Select All, Control A. We're going to go up to Select and All here. So everything is selected. And I'm going to go ahead and copy it. I can go to Edit, and I can go to Copy, or I can do Control C. I'm going to go ahead here to the elliptical tool, which might be hidden by the rectangle by default, the elliptical tool. And I'm going to select up here in the corner an oval shape, something like that. So it's selected in the upper corner. Go ahead and make sure my feather is at 50 pixels to help soften the edge here. Then I'm going to go up to Edit, and not just do a regular paste, but I'm going to go to Edit, Paste Special, and I'm going to do Paste Into, and that'll do Paste Into the selection. It'll give me a warning, yes, I want to change those color settings, they don't quite match. And now it gives me this feathered mask there to easily feather them into the box. Now they're very clearly sharp and crisp in the piece. We want to make them toned down a little bit, give them some see-throughness. So we look at our layer to layer, and we're going to go ahead and turn the opacity down to 50%. And that's changing it much darker, kind of helping them hide more into the piece. About 50% is transparent, invisible, see-through aspect to it. We're also going to change it to blending mode to luminosity to help it fit that blue color of the house in the scene, so it blends better. It seems to belong better in the scene. Then we can go ahead and save our file, and we're done. Now, as long as we keep this as a Photoshop file, we have the layers intact between our different portion of this piece. So I hope you found this enjoyable. Thanks for watching Better Picks in just a few clicks. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit subscribe to see more videos just like this one.